The Browns have hired their next offensive line coach to replace Bill Callahan. Welcome into the Cleveland Browns Report by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, breaking down the news, getting you guys familiar with Andy Dickerson, the next offensive line coach in Cleveland. We're going to talk about this hire, kind of run through whether or not it's a good move by the Browns, and I'll give you my take on the whole thing. But let's start with Albert Breer's tweet, as he was the first one to report, saying, sources, the Browns are hiring ex-Seattle offensive line coach Andy Dickerson as their new offensive line coach. Dickerson, who also spent time with the Rams under Sean McVay, replaces Bill Callahan in Cleveland. Dickerson interviewed for the Browns OC job last month. I'll also quickly add that Scott Peters, the assistant offensive line coach, he went to New England. But anyway, what did I tell you guys? Back in the beginning of this offensive coordinator coaching search, the first interview the Browns conducted was with Andy Dickerson. And back then I said, is an AVP replacement or a Bill Callahan replacement? Because Kevin Stefanski likely got word before any of us did that there was a good chance Brian Callahan, the Bengals OC, would get a head coaching hire. And if that happened, surely his father, Bill Callahan, would follow him to whoever his new post was. And that's exactly what happened. So Kevin Stefanski, the good Boy Scout he is, was prepared and started prepping for Bill Callahan replacements by bringing Andy Dickerson in under the cloud of it being an OC job, when in reality, I think the plan all along was to hire him as the next offensive line coach if Bill did move on. But let's get to know Andy Dickerson a little bit better. So he was the Seahawks offensive line coach this past season. Now, I don't know a ton about the Seattle Seahawks offensive line other than they recently drafted rookie bookend tackles, right? They were completely revamping their offensive line, and that's a big task for an offensive line coach when your left tackle and your right tackle are both rookies. And overall, I don't think those rookies have looked like all-pro players, but it's been 2 seasons. They have both battled injuries, but I think he did a good job this past season with all the injuries Seattle sustained on the offensive line. I mean, they were tossing Jason Peters and UDFAs up there to block for Geno Smith, and they did a pretty good job. So if you're looking for a football lens on this hire, I don't know if I do know Andy Dickerson is not the next Bill Callahan probably, but he's still a pretty good offensive line coach given what he had to work with this past year in the Pacific Northwest and the job he did. But let's take a closer look at his resume. So he was the O-line coach and the run game coordinator for the Seahawks. Before that, he spent a long time in St. Louis and then eventually in LA with the Rams, serving in a variety of roles, but primarily as an assistant offensive line coach. Remember, he was helping their run game when they had guys like Zach Stacy and Todd Gurley doing a great job. The New York Jets also had him as a coaching assistant in 2011, but he does know a thing or two about driving around Cleveland because from 2009 to 2010, he served as an assistant offensive line coach. Now, no one's left over from that era of Cleveland Browns football, but I'm sure like Ken Dorsey, when he gets to Breer, he's going to say the front door is the same, the staircase is the same, and everything else is different. Before that, he was a Jets defensive quality control coach, and I like when coaches have experience on both sides of the football. If you're going to coach the offensive line, you should know how defensive linemen work, right? It's good to be well-versed on both ends, and I really like that about Coach Dickerson. And before that, he was an intern, which, hey, if we're really going to read into this, if you go from intern to offensive line coach, you clearly know how to work the room well and how to impress and how to rise the ranks. And that's true for any career field. Now, before we get on to the rest of today's video and more takes on this hire, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Anytime news breaks, you know we're going to keep you guys tapped in and informed. We're trying to pick up 50 subscribers off of today's video. So if you have not joined the channel yet, make sure you go ahead and do so. If it isn't clear already, I'll make it abundantly clear right now. I like this hire. At the end of the day, you are not going to find another Bill Callahan, but as far as the available offensive line coaches go, I don't think this is a bad move, right? You bring in a coach that has experience. This is not the first time coaching the offensive line. He did that this past season in Seattle, and he gets to go from working with some really young players with the Seahawks to a very established group in Cleveland. If all 5 of these guys are healthy, I mean, we're looking at who's the youngest of the bunch? Jed Wills, who's entering his 5th season, right? 2021, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Like if the youngest guy of the bunch is entering year number 5, these are players that can almost coach themselves, right? This is like an NBA starting 5. You don't need Tyronn Lue. You've got LeBron, and they're going to be just fine without the head coach. So lucky for Andy Dickerson, his job is don't mess it up. There is Pro Bowl and all-pro talent all over this offensive line. They are handsomely paid. I'm not going to call him a glorified babysitter because at the end of the day, this is the NFL. If you're staying still, you're moving backwards. But Andy Dickerson does not come in here and they're like, hey, the offensive line's in mess. We need a new left tackle. We need a new starting center. No, they're all under contract. I'm sure the Browns are going to draft an O-lineman or two because that's what teams do. It's important to invest in the trenches. But ultimately, Dickerson takes this job and he's got a pretty good setup in terms of the work that needs to be done, which is just don't screw it up. But at the end of the day, there is no replacing Bill Callahan. I wish him the best of luck in Tennessee with Brian Callahan. I do respect how Kevin Stefanski and the Browns were not going to stand in the way of a very rare opportunity where someone can boss around their dad, as Kevin Stefanski put it. But happy trails, best of luck, Coach Callahan. But we're definitely excited for Andy Dickerson to come in here and help and hopefully continue all the great work that Coach Callahan did. Now, before we get on to the rest of today's video, because we still have some really important things to go over, I do want to tell everyone about our sponsor today, which is Game Time. We all know the big game is coming up this weekend in Las Vegas, and if you are flirting with the idea of going maybe a last-minute trip, make sure you get started with Game Time today, because what they're going to do is they're going to give everyone $100 off when you download Game Time and use code Vegas100. Now, I know that tickets are not super duper cheap to the big game, but if you download Game Time and use code Vegas100, you can save yourselves $100. And that's not nothing, right? That's going to pay for your concession runs. That's going to pay for your parking, hopefully. Like, you might as well save an extra $100 if you're going to go. Now, if you're not planning on going to the big game, no harm, no foul. Make sure you download Game Time and use code BROWNSCHAT for $20 off. And you can use that towards a Cavs game, some Guardian spring training game if you want to get out of the cold weather. Or maybe there's a concert in your local area or any other sporting event in your local area. Download Game Time today. If you want to go to the big game, use code Vegas100 to get $100 off. Or if you want to go to any other sporting event, use code BROWNSCHAT for $20 off. All that information is in the comments and description of today's video. Get started with Game Time today. So let's kind of wrap up the show by running through the updated offensive coaching staff. So the Browns coaching staff looks as follows. Kevin Stefanski at head coach, Ken Dorsey as OC. I haven't heard who's going to be the quarterback's coach. Maybe that's Ken Dorsey. He's done that role before. I'm not quite sure if they want him double dipping though. Duce Staley is the running backs coach. Chad O'Shea, he's the wide receivers coach. Tommy Rees, I think, is going to do a really good job as the tight ends coach. Oddly enough, today's video was supposed to be grades for all the coaching hires the Browns have made so far. And I gave the Tommy Rees hire an A, so a little sneak peek for a video coming out probably tomorrow now. And now we have Andy Dickerson taking over as the offensive line coach. As for the defensive side of the football, there was only one real change made. We had a defensive line coach change as Jacques Cesaire comes in from Houston. He joins Coach Jim Schwartz, and you've got other coaches who have been at that role for the past season or more. Now, before we really talk about the rest of the offensive line or offensive coaching staff, this is kind of a random off-the-wall question. I know that, but I didn't feel asking grade Andy Dickerson hire A, B, C, D, or F was all that moving. Like, how do you give a head offensive line coach grade a F? So how about this one? Shout out your city. We always start our live shows with this because I always love to see how far and wide the dog pound stretches. So if you're watching right now, get in the comment section. Don't be afraid. And let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, of course, the big hire of the offseason was Ken Dorsey. So let's spend a few minutes on this. If you have been living under a rock, let me get you up to speed. He was the Bills' offensive coordinator for the last 2 years. He took over from Brian Daboll when he got the New York Giants head coaching job. Before that, he was the Bills' QB coach and their passing game coordinator. And then before that, this is where he kind of made his name after not having a very successful playing career. He was the Carolina Panthers QB coach, where he helped Cam Newton win an MVP in 2015. Now, Ken Dorsey had his introductory press conference earlier this week, and I watched it, listened to it the whole thing, a couple times even, and there was one quote that jumped out to me that I want to share with you guys. He was talking about Deshaun Watson, and here's what he had to say. And watching Deshaun, he clearly has a great feel for a lot of different aspects of football, whether it's scheme-wise for us, instincts of what he sees on the field in terms of the defense and adjusting things. But I think that's the exciting part about working with him, is getting back to the elite level of who he is. Now, you really can't read into this too much, but they talked earlier about the types of offenses that he did with Josh Allen and Cam Newton, and he rightfully so said they're different quarterbacks. They're got some similarities, but they're not as similar as maybe your average Joe thinks. And so for Deshaun Watson, I think we can expect to see a lot of shotgun and a lot of RPOs, which I sort of thought we'd see more of back in 2022. But ultimately, the Browns didn't really change their offensive philosophy that much when they switched from Jacoby Brissett to Deshaun Watson. And then this past offseason, right, they had the entire offseason working with the Browns, and there were no awkward shadows or anything. There wasn't like this prior offseason where everyone knew he was going to get suspended. So you kind of did this odd song and dance of, Deshaun's our starter, but we're going to have Jacoby Brissett take all the reps with the number ones because we all know a suspension is coming. That wasn't the case last year, but unfortunately, injuries really came at a brutal time. He played his two best games when he got injured. The Tennessee Titans game and the Baltimore Ravens game. So hopefully, with a healthy year, Ken Dorsey can have a lot of fun with using Deshaun Watson to the best of his abilities. All right, that's going to do it for us on today's show. I really appreciate everyone for tuning into another edition of the Cleveland Browns Report. We've got Cullen in today, and Cullen actually, don't ask why, he's a Seahawks fan. He's not from Seattle. But you know, and this is true for free agency, regardless of the sport, regardless of your team, anytime your team makes an acquisition and you know someone from the prior team they were on, you always look to them for like, good, bad, what do you think? And if they're upset about losing that coach or that player, then you know it's a great hire. And Cullen's initial reaction was like, damn, that's a bit of a bummer. So now I feel better about the hire. Now I feel pretty good about the hire.
Yeah, no, you guys got a great one for sure.
Cullen, which card do you want to go with?
All right, offensive lineman.
Offensive lineman, the big boys.
Group of 5.
Oh,
okay.
I like it. I like it.
And offensive linemen are usually kind of the bigger fellas. You can
Yeah.
even say they club their opponents.
Oh,
5 clubs.
that's beautiful.
is my
Damn.
club.
I want you to win. I don't want to win anymore. You just... Okay. Give me a 6 diamonds. No good reason. You were on the right train of thought. 2 of clubs. 2 of clubs. That's a bummer. That's a bummer. All right, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your... It's Wednesday already. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you all tomorrow.